I show up to South Sudan, and what you get, everybody that comes, first time, you get a security briefing. And so it's this former soldier who'd been in some conflicts in his own day. And he said, all right, Dave, here's the situation. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 things happening. You've got this conflict over here. You've got this flood over here. They could take the capital. We don't know. We're looking at it right now. And I'm going, what have I done? Like, what am I doing with my life? And I'll say it poorly. Essentially, it kind of eliminates prejudice when you travel, right? Because you kind of get out of your own skin and your own ideas. And it's, again, like how people relate to each other, or how people will cope with loss, or how people will celebrate a victory, or how people will kind of deal with stress. And I think if you're interested in that introspection about kind of questioning yourself and, again, your character, I think it's a fascinating component of the work, which I think has kept me in the humanity. Just imagine it's a girl of 10 years old and she's desperate for food, and someone goes, I have food, but you're going to have to do 1, 2, 3. And it could be child labor. It could be exploitation, sexual exploitation. Those things exist, to be quite clear. So part of humanitarian efforts is to ensure that people are protected, even during emergencies. It's a challenge, but it's really the core, certainly for World Vision, and I'm sure it's the case for multiple NGOs, that really protection of civilians and protection of children is number one.
Hey everyone, Rupesh Patel here, host of the Two Nobodies podcast, and you're about to listen to a conversation with David Munkley, who is the Eastern Zone Director for World Vision International. David is situated in the Eastern DRC Rwanda area, where there is an ongoing humanitarian crisis, but more recently things have really flared up. David talks about what it's like to lead and manage through these kind of humanitarian crises. What are the mental challenges that he faces, the burnout that his staff and him also face. We talk about what it's like to work with other organizations when a natural disaster or an immediate response is required. How is that all kind of coordinated together? It's a really cool conversation, especially if you're someone who's interested in becoming a humanitarian. This is absolutely the episode for you. David walks you through the journey that he went through in working for a large organization like World Vision. So you're definitely going to enjoy this if you're interested in that humanitarian front, especially with the recent conflicts in Ukraine and Gaza. I hope you enjoy this episode. Like, subscribe, and look forward to your comments. Cheers.
Welcome to the Two Nobodies podcast with my dad.
All right, we're rolling, Dave. It's so good to see you. It's been like almost 20 years, 18, 19, 20 years. It's been a long time. I'm so thrilled to be able to talk to you. There's this gap from when I last saw you to now, and I'm so eager to hear about your journey and your story of kind of watching you from afar through LinkedIn and some of these updates, and just like from afar, I think we can all say we're so proud of you and the work that you're doing. So really eager to kind of tap into that and understand your story a bit better. I'm definitely curious about, the situation that you're currently in the Rwanda, Eastern Congo kind of situation, and definitely just want to understand World Vision in general. I think, we all grew up watching, commercials of World Vision and what World Vision is about. And then just talk about sort of just broadly humanitarian crises around the world and the approach that not only World Vision takes, but also just your perspective on things. So just welcome you to the Two Nobodies podcast, and really looking forward to talking to you today.
Happy to be here. Yeah, much to discuss, I'm sure. Interesting, right? From so long ago when we were together. So much has changed. We both have children. Long and circuitous journeys, I'm sure. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. The last time I saw you, Dave, was you were playing basketball for the Waterloo Warriors. I must say, you were actually a big inspiration for me. I remember like how much you like. I was a young, I think it was in second year university, and I looked up to all you folks because I'd never played team sports before. And so to really be a part of this team and you folks welcoming me, and you were a senior at the time. And so for you to like reach down to me and like, even little things like letting me tape your ankle at times, or like, that was just like, I just found you as such a great leader in that way to bring me along into that process. And so I was always like eager to kind of support you from a therapist perspective. So I just wanted to first start off in that way. That's the way I left seeing you, is in this kind of leadership role. And man, could you fly? I remember you doing like windmill dunks, and like you're just such a crucial part of that team. So it's so cool to just kind of reconnect in this way from where I last left you.
Yeah, it's interesting. I haven't thought too much about the basketball side of university. I did religious studies, so that's kind of oriented me in a way on my path. But to think back when we first started in basketball, the team wasn't that good. I remember our first year, we were kind of a laughing stock. It was the place where teams would go to get an easy win.
Yeah.
And what I really enjoyed about it was, and the guys in my first year, and then the guys that came a year after us, I think there was maybe 4, and then the year after it was 5. And that was basically the team for 3 years. And so we were able to really get to know each other. We still talk to each other, a lot of those guys. And yeah, and listen, I thought we were great basketball players, but ultimately what made us successful in those last couple of years, right? Made it to the playoffs, made it to the nationals, was I think a real understanding of who we were as a team, where I'm really strong, where I'm weak, how you fill in, how we manage, problems together when the ball's not dropping, how to pick each other up. And I think that's something I've taken with me, because again, so much of what we do in the humanitarian, sphere is team based. It's like a project team, it's a program team, it's an entire organization. And understanding what makes a good team, I think, was something that I took with me from Waterloo, and it's really benefited me in the years since.
That's fantastic. And I always
As
wonder,
for, if I can say, I just want to say about, the athletics, I'm so far from jumping and dunking these days. I think I came across a video a few years ago of me dunking, and I go, oh, that young man, look at him go. I'm much more grounded these days. Now it's doing things like where I am currently. I do some self-defense and some cycling and that kind of thing. But yeah, it's interesting to kind of just think back to, we were some good athletes back when we were very younger.
yeah. Yeah, the cornrows going on. I remember at one point you had a different look going on.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, as cornrows, I was really brash, lots of confidence. And I can actually say once I finished school and once I finished basketball, I didn't pick up a ball for quite some time afterwards. It was almost, I think it was a very clear decision to say, the basketball is done. What's next? And I spent a lot of time kind of asking, because you take a lot of your identity, certainly if you're playing basketball in university, it's a big deal, or if it's football or track or whatever. But then the next step comes, and that's your profession. What are you doing? What's the next thing? How are you going to make money? And so I spent a lot of time kind of wrestling with that question. Like I said, I'd done religious studies, I did philosophy. So the next few years was really kind of asking questions of myself, and in doing so, I was getting into where I'm sure we're going to talk about, which was World Vision. I actually volunteered with Doctors Without Borders. I volunteered with World Vision, and yeah, the next few years were about kind of getting out of that. I don't want to say persona, but again, this like brash young kid who was playing ball, and then it was time to take another step, to more introspection. So yeah, it was an important time for me.
Did you feel like there was a bit of a change of identity for you?
Yeah, I think in life you go through phases. I mean, even I remember I would hear guys talking about high school, and I went, oh my gosh, from high school to university was almost, you don't want to say you were a different person, but you kind of, again, you got into situations and you ask questions of yourself, and you find yourself without money, like there's a lot of things. And then post university. So there's so many phases in life that I think you're kind of figuring out who you are and then refiguring out and kind of going deeper within that. And as you go forward in life, I sometimes think the challenges become greater, right? Again, you become more independent. There's more of a reliance on just figuring things out and making a living for yourself. So yeah, I think that changed and evolved. And that's why it's really enjoyable to have this discussion now, because I hadn't really thought about myself back then for quite some time. And yeah, I was again, like a young, brash kid, trying to make the NBA from Canadian college. So yeah, it's nice to think about that, but it's been, again, a very long road, and yeah, it's been quite a ride. Again, I'm sure we'll talk about much of this.
We're going to talk about much of that. I got to leave you with one more thing though from that time. And I remember this moment very clearly. You talk about brash young kid. There was a moment where you folks were all kind of standing in the lobby just before you were about to get out on the court. You always, the team would always kind of gather in a huddle or whatever before they kind of go out. And you always need your Gatorade before the game. and you're like,
Yeah.
Pesh, can you get me this Gatorade?
Yeah.
And I was like, sure. So I went to go get this Gatorade, and I came back, and you're like, Pesh, you just won us the game. And I was like, all right, sounds good. I was like, man, this guy's got some confidence, let me tell you. But yeah, that was a moment I remember about you for sure. So
I would say, I think part of, so I'll say this. If you go to a basketball team, doesn't matter if it's a high school, college, pro, if it's like little leagues, whatever. I think there's always this idea that like, man, I'm not getting enough minutes. Coach is
mm,
not seeing it. Come on,
mm,
like I'm averaging 4 points, I should be averaging 7. The guy that's averaging 13, he should be averaging 18,
yeah,
and so on and so forth. I think I think that's in a way it's good because I think there's you need to have confidence in yourself. And what I've really come to realize, maybe is one of my realizations in life, is confidence is a choice. You
mm,
can choose really to have a confidence in yourself or not. And I think certainly with a sport where there's a lot of kind of a performance component, yeah, you really need to be kind of telling yourself, repeating over and over, I deserve this. I deserve to go out. I think when the ball's in my hands, I'm going to make the best play. And you take that obviously off the court. You take that to many other things. Ultimately, what I've found has been something that's helped me in my life and in my career to where I am now is choosing to believe that, I deserve the opportunity. I have to go after it. I need to say yes.
mm,
When something's tough, I go and meet that challenge. And I think that that's been extremely helpful, especially in the humanitarian world where you come across crises, disasters, conflict. Um, and yeah, you need to find something within yourself if you're
yeah,
going to really, I don't want to say survive, but, meet the urgency of the moment and come to the top of it.
yeah. What was it about World Vision that got you so interested? Like you said, you started volunteering with them. I mean, we all grew up watching. At least I did. I grew up watching, Alex Trebek and the commercials, and as a kid, it was hard to watch those scenes. But that's sort of my early memory as a World Vision, right? Is that kind of that sort of ambassador work that Alex Trebek did. But for you, like volunteering for World Vision, like what drew you to them?
Yeah, it's funny because in my first year in Waterloo, I was in business and it just wasn't
Mm,
fitting. There was no fit for me. Business just didn't work. I couldn't find something. There was like something missing, like the why of it all. And
yeah,
so in my second year, I changed my major to religious studies and it really took off for me. I ended up getting honors, thankfully. Um, but to me, that was kind of speaking to the human condition and the why behind things. And so even when I was finished, I was kind of looking at this and going, would I get into sales or would I get into, I don't know, like some specific trade? The trade, I mean, all due respect, trades, of course, but I was kind of like questioning myself and my place in life, and I thought NGOs. I don't know if they were necessarily answering the question, but I think they could help me maybe on the journey. When again, a young man looking to kind of make sense of this world.
yeah,
And then I'll also say, coupled with the fact that my parents were always into volunteerism,
mm,
in high school, I volunteered at Trillium Health Center in Mississauga. And then we would do work with United Way. So it became part and parcel of kind of my parents would, at first, obviously, they would force me to go. You're going. And then it
yeah,
was, it feels like it makes sense. You need to give back and you need to give of yourself. And I think part of university with religious studies was there was a book by Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, which I think religious studies sometimes is misunderstood to be about dogma, but it was really about understanding, where we fit into all of this, just beyond the material, but sometimes the immaterial. So I kind of felt like looking out at different careers and opportunities with, again, that volunteer past. I thought, you know what, I want to see what these guys are about. And then, very specifically, World Vision was in Mississauga, and I'm
mm,
from Mississauga. So, I
mm,
mean, geographical, what would you say? Yeah, just the proximity of it was like, well, there, because if it had been maybe Oxfam or
mm.
Norwegian Refugee Council, which is, of course, not there, but it could have been them. So it was really kind of looking at that. And sorry, to say one more thing, I know that World Vision is one of the large NGOs, so it's quote unquote the big leagues in a way. Like it's a global program. There's many offices. There's many programming. There's humanitarian work, development work. So again, I kind of looked at that and thought, it feels like there's something here. I didn't think it would
Yeah.
be a career. I really was looking to answer some greater questions. It's turned into something else.
That's amazing. And so in working in World Vision, were they a pretty supportive organization? Like how do they sort of how do they I guess promote people, and how do you gain those experiences to get to the place right? Because right now you're the Eastern Zone director. So what does that mean for folks, I guess?
I started literally opening doors. I remember I came to them and said I want to volunteer, and I
Mm,
opened doors at events, World Vision Canada events. And I mean, I've got no pay, clearly, volunteer. And it was really just one thing after the other. And I got to know the receptionist, and it was an older woman. And we hit it off. She was just a lovely woman, and she would see me, and, oh, hi, Dave. And there was just kind of a general warmth. And I thought, oh, I'm really a nobody. I mean, I'm a volunteer. I'm coming in here and working a weekend or something. And but I just kind of liked it. I liked I guess you can say, the culture from this kind of volunteer outside perspective. And it kind of drew me in further. And I did a couple of more. And it was in 2008 that I realized a religious studies degree is nice. It's not going to put me at the top of the pyramid for humanitarian work.
right.
So I went to Humber College and I did a postgrad program in international project management, which is now the international development postgrad. And I had, at the same time, just before that, I'd gotten a job in the marketing department with World Vision, and that was literally touring across Canada with an exhibit speaking about HIV/AIDS prevention or cases that's been happening, how to sponsor a child. Obviously, it was a marketing tool to get engagement for World Vision, but that kind of got me in the door with just marketing. Marketing, I had no really clue. I was helping
Yeah.
set this thing up. We'd work 14-hour days from Vancouver to Montreal to Winnipeg, I think Mississauga, Edmonton. So that was one of those things where it was kind of like I was with these guys. I think one was a former missionary from Kenya, this German gentleman, and another one was a musician. So it was kind of like this motley crew of guys running
Yeah.
around the country, having fun, putting in really long days and weeks, because it would go on for 2 weeks. And so I was able to do that part time while I was doing this postgrad program. So the entire time that I was doing this postgrad program, I've been kind of popping my head in. Now, if you look at World Vision, obviously it's a balance between different departments. So I was in
Hmm.
this marketing department. I would make my way over just fine. I would go, where's the international development department? And they'd go, it's over there. So I'd find my, people, and I would literally just go, I'm Dave, I'm doing this program. And they would kind of orient me. We'll talk to that person and that person. And I would say, hey, I'm the guy. I'm the next guy. Again, I guess that confidence
Yeah.
continued on.
Yeah.
And they were going, yeah, ease up, guy. You don't know what you don't know. But eventually I found out that there was an internship. There was an internship opportunity that they were going to send me to Rwanda. Well, I shouldn't say they were going to send me. I kind of pushed and pushed and pushed, and it kind of felt like I was in a good position to get this.
Yeah.
Um, and then I completed the program. And by that time, the opportunity had switched. They said it's actually now in the DRC, DR Congo. And so I said, yeah, I don't care. Send me. Go. I'll go anywhere. And so at that point, they sent me as an intern to Lubumbashi and Likasi. And this was in 2009. And at that point, I mean, it was, I'd been to Africa once in 2000 in Nigeria for a
Mm.
basketball kind of tournament with a few Canadian basketball players. But that was this, they just kind of put me in the city and said, good luck for 1 year. And I just had to figure out, living in a place. It was French and Swahili. My French was okay, had to get a lot better. But that was kind of a moment when I guess in life you're confronted with these challenges and you just say, listen, I could kind of go into a little ball and circle and not get anything out of this. Or I could make the most of this opportunity, learn more French, learn some Swahili, and learn about all the work that we're doing. So it was a formative time. And yeah, I just kind of soaked it in. Anything anyone needed to do. I'm talking, Dave, can you translate this document? Dave, can you go to this community meeting? Dave, can you literally make photocopies? I was like, yes, 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 and yes. Because at the end of that year, we came back to Canada, and I thought, I need to just get an experience on my CV, right? I
Yeah.
need to
Yeah.
kind of understand what's going on. So I'd had this postgrad, I'd had this internship. And a friend was one of the other interns. He was an intern in Tanzania. And for me, there was no opportunities after. I remember I applied to 400 plus jobs. I remember just every day applying, not getting anything back. I was probably unrealistic, to be honest. Sometimes you look and go, oh, director. Well, I've spent a year in the Congo. Maybe I should be a director. Nope. Intro jobs. But I applied to 1,000 things, really. And it didn't come off for me. And so there was this period when I was kind of like, oh, geez, that might have been it. And
Questioning things
so
again,
through
probably,
my own basketball connections, I mean, it was, because I think anybody who is young and looking for work and can't find it, they kind of start asking questions, self-worth, right? Am I worth this thing? Like, can I get it done? Yeah. And I think most young people, early to mid, even late 20s, even early 30s, are kind of like, well, what's my direction? Where am I going? So in the meantime, through my own basketball connections, I'd been able to work with First Nations communities up in northern Quebec, northern Ontario, which in itself was fascinating. We were doing sports for development. It was like doing summer camps. It was working with different teams. It was teaching them certain fundamentals and principles. I thought it was amazing, but I still wanted to kind of get back into this humanitarian world, right? I had my postgrad. I was kind of like trying to figure this out. And as luck would have it, my friend who had been with World Vision in Tanzania, he said, Dave, there's something that's come across. This was about a year after, by the way. So it was a year plus between Congo and this next thing. He said, we've got this position, a program officer in South Sudan, newly independent country. What do you think? And again, I probably should have asked more questions. I went straight into, yep, let's do it. I'm in. When can I go? And I think it was from that time, it was maybe a 2-week turnaround. And I said, all right, I'm here. And I can remember now thinking back to all these things. I show up to South Sudan, and what you get, everybody that comes, first time, or you're a visitor, or you're from the World Vision Partnership, you get a security briefing. And so it's this former soldier who'd been in some conflicts in his own day. And he said, all right, Dave, here's the situation. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 things happening. You've got this conflict over here. You've got this flood over here. They could take the capital. We don't know. We're looking at it right now. And I'm going, what have I done? Like, what am I doing with my life? And I could feel it in my guts, right? And so I was like, no, I can't turn around. Like, I'm here. I'm in. So that was ultimately like about a year and a half in South Sudan. But I should say, some people don't survive the security briefing. There were a few people that heard the briefing and then got back onto the next plane. But once you get there, so I want to say something about this because it's important. So yes, there's this first week when, or I should even say the first 48 hours when you're going, what am I doing here? I can't believe it. Like, there's no Starbucks. There's nothing here. Like, I'm really worried. I can see that there's some difficult situations, but then you get used to it. And then you learn how to function within it, right? You learn the nature of the insecurity and where you can go and where you can't. And then all of a sudden you kind of find yourself, you're kind of rubbing your eyes and going, I just went out to dinner. I had drinks with some friends. I just played some basketball. Like, yeah, I think I'm okay. And so South Sudan was a context that I grew to very much enjoy. It was like a great time. It was, again, a time of great challenges because as a program officer in this kind of introductory level job, what you're doing is you're finding money. So you're talking to donors,
right?
You're writing proposals, and you hope they get funded. So it was a very stressful time. But at the same time, I felt like I'm putting my skills to use. I'm, again, challenging myself. I'm meeting people from all points of the world. A lot of South Sudan, the people there were, of course, South Sudanese, but then you would meet Kenyans and Ethiopians and Tanzanians and Australians, right? It was really global. So I felt like, oh, this is really, have I found my group of people? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's, there's a part of that, in the humanitarian world where you kind of go into these places and, you kind of feel like I kind of belong here. This feels good. But again, it wasn't without its challenges. I got severely ill a couple of times. But that's part of the adventure. And sorry, I'm droning on, but it's really important to say, because if you're in Canada and you hear about something in South Sudan, you imagine the worst. And when all you hear about over the course of a year is there was a conflict here, there was an issue there was a drought here, you'll only think of the worst of that country, right? Naturally. So I think it was really good for me to be able to travel first to the DRC and then to South Sudan. And I'm sure we'll talk about these other postings, but it kind of challenges your own understanding of like how you ingest the news. And I feel like you need to go deeper. And what I found out was there was a beauty to South Sudan. There was a complexity to it. There was, of course, many challenges, but I was sad when I eventually left because, I got to meet some great people. I had some really fun times. And can I say one story about South Sudan?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Probably got a million stories. So I was playing basketball by myself because I was still playing basketball. And it was just a court beside a major road, but it was a full court, right? It was just cement. And a couple of guys came and they could see I could play a little. So they said, listen, do you want to play? And then we had some pickup runs. So now I was playing on Saturdays and Sundays, and I was having a lot of fun because South Sudanese, some great ballers there, like tall guys. And there was a lot of South Sudanese who had lived for a long time in the US because of the war, and they came back. So I was playing with guys from like Iowa, and I was playing with guys from Kansas and New York and even Canada. And so they said, listen, we got a game set up. Why don't you come to this stadium? So they invited me, and I was like, yeah, a little fun game, right? I don't know. I show up, and there was security, and I could hear a lot of noise. And I went inside, and it was a full like military event, and it was packed stands. Now it was an outdoor court, but I want to say there was like 4,000 or 5,000 people, and they did like judo demonstrations, and they were doing all this. And then the main event was the basketball, and I was on the team of just ringers, I found out, against the military team. And so we were playing, and it was like 4,000 people like screaming at us. And I couldn't believe, like, it was a great, amazing time because who would have thought, right? I was just playing basketball with these guys against the military team. And I remember taking free throws, and there was hundreds of people like, you're going to miss, and just screaming at me. And I was kind of bouncing the ball going, this is fun,
Yeah.
And so those are the things that you kind of don't hear about. It was a great time, and I'm glad for it because, again, on the path in life, I think you're always trying to kind of go deeper within yourself and find out more about yourself. And I think South Sudan taught me a lot about, I guess my character, some toughness, and again, professionally, I think we were able to do some great things. So
that's a great story, Dave. What you said about just like Canadians' perspectives or outsider perspectives on what life might be like in South Sudan or any of these countries. Like as soon as you said South Sudan, I got triggered. I was just like, oh, like you went there, like because I remember what it was like when that split happened, and there are enormous conflicts if I recall correctly. So for you to kind of normalize it and say, hey, there's it's okay. Like there's a vibrant life going on there, and it's life is actually really different than what we see. I think that's important for people to hear.
Yeah, and I'll say this. I mean, when conflict happens, humans are not prepared. I mean, I don't think we're built for conflict. Generally speaking, if you just see the trauma that happens, and it's something usually, I've unfortunately had a lot of experience seeing trauma because I've worked in the Syria response. I've worked in Turkey and Jordan and Lebanon during this. What I mean to say is I think in conflict, and as I had seen in South Sudan, of course, was that there's an effect, right? People are troubled and concerned, and coping mechanisms are difficult. So that exists. That's all clear. And like I said, and you'll hear something happening bad in South Sudan. It's quite bad, right? That's why, I mean, a World Vision or the humanitarian community will respond. But there's also, this is what I mean to say is like there's a great music scene in the DRC. I would say like I thought there was a really interesting cuisine in South Sudan. Like there's a whole world, that's within South Sudan that usually isn't captured. Part of it is very clearly captured, which can be, I mean, again, international news stories and these kinds of things. But what I learned was, again, I just think that there's a quote, and I'll say it poorly. Essentially, it kind of eliminates prejudice when you travel, right? Because you kind of get out of your own skin and your own ideas.
Yeah.
And it's again like how people relate to each other, or how people will cope with loss, or how people
Mm-hmm.
will celebrate a victory, or how people will kind of deal with stress. And in Canada, it's one thing. In South Sudan, it could be slightly different, or in the DRC, it could be even slightly different, or maybe or majorly different. And so, I think if you're interested in that introspection about what it does to you and kind of questioning yourself and again your character, I think it's a fascinating component of the
Mm-hmm.
work, which I think has kept me in the humanitarian world because to be quite clear, I think that there's a lot of humanitarians that only spend a few years. I don't like it because, again, there are some hardships that are difficult to come to grips with. There can be loneliness. There can, again, the distance away from family and friends. The job is tough. Sometimes the context is extremely difficult. So those are some of the things that have kind of kept me going, is just this kind of fascination with different
Yeah.
cultures and people,
Yeah.
and how that plays back into me.
Yeah. Would you say you experienced any forms of prejudice and discrimination when you went to those when you first went there?
Yeah, I mean, listen, yeah, but not in a bad way. Nothing that was unmanageable. So, I mean, it's a funny thing. So, in East Africa, I should say most East Africa because it's Swahili, people will say Muzungu. Muzungu is white person or
Mm.
foreigner. And then different places in South Sudan, I think it was Kwaja, and in Rwanda it's Murungu, and in the western part of DRC it's Mundele. So people will say things, but most people it's again I think people will not really go in with a preconceived notion. They'll say I've had a couple of experiences where someone's kind of been yelling at me.
Yeah.
I remember one time in South Sudan there was unfortunately a drunk guy, and he thought that I was Arabic, but he called
Mm.
me Kawaja, and he threatened to beat me up. And I was like, I'm nowhere close to this conflict. I'm sorry, I'm from Canada. But again, he was just drunk. So I would say,
Yeah.
listen, 99.9% of people, they'll see me and they'll go, oh, yeah, it's a tall white guy. Hi, generally speaking. Um, but no, I don't think things have really gotten in the way. Again, listen, there's bad people everywhere, and sometimes
Yeah.
one of those bad people makes themselves known to you, and that's about it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
generally speaking, it's been great. And I think part of that, if I want to speak to World Vision, I can say I've appreciated the culture of World Vision, which is there's a lot of meritocracy associated with World
Mm.
Vision. You do a good job, usually doors will open. If you do a bad job, you might get stuck in that same spot or moved out.
Yeah.
So generally speaking, like when it comes down to working on a project team or a program, I would say the large majority of that is like how well can you do the work, how do you function
Yeah.
as a team player, how do you step up, how do you step in,
Yeah.
and I've really enjoyed that. I think that's been a great part of the work. Yeah.
That sounds like an awesome culture to work in. I think when folks think of World Vision, like you naturally think of like the sponsoring a child, but I imagine it's more than that. Like, what are the different elements of World Vision's work that goes beyond sort of, I guess, the sort of sponsoring a child? I guess.
Yeah. So for a long time, it was kind of more narrowly at the beginning, more about sponsoring a child to ensure that there would be ongoing funds for longer term development. A
Hmm.
lot of the work that I found myself in World Vision, I would say was and World Vision began to expand. I should say in the 70s and 80s, it would get more involved in the humanitarian side of things. I think the Ethiopian famine was a big point for a lot of NGOs, and then expanding further still to other humanitarian crises. And so the work that I do is more about I don't want to say it's crises led, but there is kind of it's not the sponsorship piece. It is more
Okay.
grant funded. So maybe an example. In 2021, in Eastern DRC, Mount Nyiragongo erupted. I remember the night when it happened because I could see it. And we were
Jeez.
all freaked out. And what that led to was the displacement of about 500,000 people in the first
Yeah.
night. Very quickly. It was kind of like a chaotic evacuation of the city. Then they realized, or we all realized, that the volcano wasn't going to sweep over Goma. So then most people came back. But then the earthquake started. So again, it was in the span of, I think, twice in 5 days that the city was evacuated. Again, that's a huge city. I'm talking 1 million people. And so what you had was a ton of displaced people. And that's really where our program stepped in and stepped up, was we were working with the World Food Program to
Hmm.
provide, essential foodstuffs. We were providing protection programming because, again, a component of World Vision's work, I would say the core component really is child protection. And that's really more about what my career has been about, which has been associated with an emergency, a natural disaster, a conflict, a drought. And I would say it's been a part of the humanitarian industry that's grown further still. If you look at the humanitarian overall budget, it continues to go up. It went up very much in the last couple of years because of the Ukraine crisis. And that has been, I think it was, I want to say 6 million people, probably more, were displaced. And that's when you get more of this kind of humanitarian component of the work, which is responsive. It's quick, it's agile. And then the other point is in more stable context. If I could say maybe like, I don't know, like a Zambia or maybe a Thailand, areas that might have more kind of concerns over longer term or difficult type of poverty that isn't necessarily emergency level. You might have a kind of a longer term, slower, but also more participative program, right? That speaks to maybe addressing food insecurity issues that have been, generational. For us, our timeline is shorter. It might be 6 months, it might be 9 months, it might be 1 or 2 or even 3 years, but it usually is responding to something. Yeah.
In those sort of emergency situations, what does the coordination look like between some of these NGOs? Is it gotten much better over the years? Because when you hear about sort of these emergency situations, you think about, at least I think about like the Red Cross. I think about Doctors Without Borders. You're starting to make me think about World Vision. But I guess in terms of the coordination, is it pretty seamless, or do you think there's still a lot of room for improvement? Is it clunky in any way? And how does that sort of organize itself, I guess, when an emergency situation happens? Is it more led by sort of the government and kind of bringing NGOs to the table? Or I have no view or understanding of how this all works.
Sure. Maybe I'll go back to, well, no, I'll use another example. There was a very bad landslide that occurred. It was localized. It was a landslide in a place called Kalehe, which is just on the lake, on the border of Lake Kivu. And that was after a few days of heavy rain. So we'd heard about this. Now, what has to happen for kind of this action to take place? First is the government declares that there's an emergency. So it's the government of the day that will say, listen, this is an emergency. We need support. At which point there is, listen, you've got all your international NGOs. Again, I can say, as you would say, Doctors Without Borders, World Vision, Oxfam, NRC, Save the Children. The list is long. We might have a capacity there or not. Let's just say that we do. So we might be able to respond quite quickly in the span of 24 to 48 hours. If in fact we have pre-positioned supplies, which is important. Because if there's no food available, in or around the area, it can be quite difficult. Now, if the scale goes very high, you would even take a charter plane. And because you're looking at, a massive emergency that requires instant action. In this case, for the landslide, it was apocalyptic, if I may say. It was horrible, but it was quite local. And so the number was a bit smaller. So what we did was we worked with a UN body called the UN Office of Coordinating Humanitarian Affairs. We call them OCHA. Okay. There's a lot of acronyms in our field. OCHA. So they're the one that will usually say, all right, who's doing food? Who's doing health? Who's doing education? Who's doing water and sanitation? And you'll get different actors kind of coming in either with their own funds or something that they've applied for as an emergency grant. And World Vision, in our case, would go, we do food. And they'll say, okay, listen, there's 4,000 people that need support. Go. It's obviously there's a little more complexity, but as you can see, very simply. And then someone else will go, we're a leading water actor. We can do water trucking. Another one says, we do mental health and psychosocial support. Another one says, we do education. And OCHA might say, listen, this needs to be about getting food. We need shelter and we need water for 4,000 people. Done. And so then you go and you're working in coordination. So you're coordinating with different local NGOs, international NGOs, national NGOs. You're working through this OCHA coordinating mechanism. But it's not so simple. You're checking in every day. There's a daily meeting. How have we done? Listen, this group, they couldn't get the water trucks to come in. We need a secondary thing. Can someone get chlorinated tablets and we can chlorinate this water source? There's an issue. We can't drive to the location. It's blocked off. What are we going to do? Do we need a helicopter? Do we need something else? And in a first phase emergency, Obviously, time is your enemy because you're looking at things. Can people go without food for 24 hours? Yes. Can they go without water for 24 hours? Well, instantly you're causing some difficulties. You're risking epidemics. You're risking outbreaks of something, right? It could be cholera. People could be drinking dirty water.
Mm-hmm.
There could be traumatized people. There could be people still trapped in the rubble. Are there efforts underway? So there's a bit of chaos, I would say, chaos, if I may, that as the days go forward and you have these multiple meetings and you're kind of checking in with each other and checking in with other groups, you're kind of going, I think we know where we are. We know the number of people affected. We know what they need. The first efforts, you go in and now okay, we've got a few iterations of this and let's keep doing it again and again. So that landslide, it was pretty good. I would say there was good performance because we were able to get there quickly. Fortunately, I should say, World Vision, we had an office that was very close to the landslide, so we were able to act very quickly and also provide not only food assistance but protection support, which is, again, in an emergency, if I can just say, somebody is desperate for food. Let's just imagine It's a girl of 10 years old and she's desperate for food, and someone goes, I have food, but you're going to have to do 1, 2, 3. And it could be child labor, it could be exploitation, sexual exploitation. Those things exist, to be quite clear. So part of humanitarian efforts is to ensure that people are protected even during emergencies. It's a challenge, but it's really the core, certainly for World Vision, and I'm sure it's the case for multiple NGOs, that really protection of civilians and protection of children is number one. So, and then if I can say, so at the end of this landslide, now it's been 3 weeks, it's been 4 weeks. We can really see now, it's quite clear to us, who's been assisted, what remains, if there's anything else that needs to happen. You can start to breathe because the first really couple of weeks, it's tough to sleep because you know that people are very concerned. So you're pulling in very long hours, and it's all about kind of troubleshooting and reacting to new things and events. So it's a high stress. It's not always a high stress, but it can be incredibly stressful because you're kind of looking at things. And if I can say, I showed up to the landslides and I was providing some support. And unfortunately, some of the things that I'd seen in the landslide, I still carry with me mentally to this day, because you'll see bodies in some certain situations. You can see traumatized children or people or families. But the scale of destruction sometimes it's stunning. Like, it's tough to kind of mentally make sense of that. And so something that you have to be careful of if you're a humanitarian is that you can deal with trauma. It's secondary trauma, of course. You didn't go through the event yourself, but to be there and to support people that have gone through, it as a secondary, again, it can be something very difficult. And I think ever since, I suppose, South Sudan, there have been kind of certain things and different postings that stay with me to this day. I still kind of work through, I suppose.
I definitely want to understand that part of sort of how you find balance for yourself. But before I get to that, for you, what does good leadership look like in these sort of situations? Like, you're in a formal leadership position now, but what do you think good leadership looks like in these sort of immediate emergency situations, or and what are the things you consider as a leader?
So I think you have to be there. I think if we're talking about more specifically a disaster response, right? It's not just that, but in this situation, a disaster response, you can't do it at distance. I think it's, in a way, it's disrespectful to the people that are pulling in these 16, 18-hour days that are going just full on. You should, if you're not there, you should get there. Doesn't mean you need to be on site the entire time, because again, a lot of what we kind of gone over coordination efforts and communicating to within the World Vision Partnership and the humanitarian world and donors doesn't mean that you're wearing boots on site, right? But you should be seen to be present. I think that's very important, because sometimes these are volatile or fragile situations. Not to say that we're chancing things security-wise, but again, I think that there's a real value in showing up. Something I learned when I was a boy was my father, who himself was a manager and later became a president of a company, was you need to lead from the front. Simple. And that's something I took, near and dear to myself. and it stays with me to this day. Lead from the front. You can't lead from the back.
Yeah.
That's one part of it. The other part was something that took me time to get to, which was you don't need to meet the urgency of the moment with your own kind of anxiety, which is to say, I've been in, again, disaster situations where people are losing their heads. I mean, the volcano, to be quite clear, people were really losing their minds. Like, it was chaos. I mean, imagine the prospect of a volcanic eruption swallowing
I
a
can't
city.
even.
And so to meet that energy with kind of your own franticness is not good. You have to be the opposite of that. So I remember there was probably a point a few years ago, I think when I was in Jordan, when I was working in Jordan, there was kind of a decision to make, and everybody looked at me and I went, oh, I'm the guy that decides this. It's me. I'm the one. And because, you don't find yourself usually, you're part of a team, and then you're part of maybe a smaller team, and you might be part of a management or leadership team. And then there's a point when it comes to you and you're like, oh yeah. That one's on me. And so it took me some time to go, even if you don't have all the answers, because you don't, even if things are, again, chaotic, it's kind of like find your center, find your calmness, because people will pick up on your good energy and your bad energy, and they'll imitate that. Like if I'm going around the entire time going, this thing is, oh my gosh, like whatever the case, right? We don't have the thing. What's going on? People will take that and kind of go, that's the energy of this disaster response that we're doing. So for me, what I found, it's very important to take some time, literally to like take some time and go like some breaths, find my voice, find my center. And then when someone's coming to me with an urgency, because they'll come to you and be like, I don't know what's going on. We have a thing and I can't find these disaster kits. And I'll go, well, let's figure that out together. All right. Where did we see them, and who can we talk to, and who do we confirm with? And what's the turnaround time to get those to the field? And they'll go, it's going to be like 3 days. And I'll go, well, let's break that down. And so for me, I think it's very important to kind of put your fingerprints onto you as a leader, how this response is going to go. And I think part of that really early is checking in with your people, making sure that they're okay. Because again, if you're in a response and you're seeing some kind of destruction or you're seeing trauma, it's often neglected that people, again, that see this, they might really suffer from it. I've been in those situations where people kind of shut down and their performance isn't great. So you have to take time every day to check in and go, how are you doing? Not just what are you doing? So it's very important to check in with people and talk about how we're doing, not just what we're doing. The what we're doing will dominate most of the day. What we're doing in terms of what sector we're providing support to, the pre-positioning, the coordination. There's so many things that are going on, but you need to be very disciplined in doing so, making sure the well-being of your team is being addressed. And then sometimes, so most people don't work in a disaster. And I think there needs to be an occasional push. So somebody might kind of be really stressed and anxious about this. And they think, you know what, if I just send 10 mails, that's my job. And it's like, no. We're all focused on getting these items into the field, the quote unquote field, the area where something happened, to meet the needs of people that have been most affected. And it's difficult because, again, sometimes people get a little bit paralysis by analysis, or they don't want to make a decision. So you need to also be kind of pushing appropriately the pace, because you don't want to say, it's been 1 week. We're all clearly aware that there's a problem. We haven't really done something. We've had a lot of great discussions that hasn't translated into the action. And that is something, and I've done training for young humanitarians, and they're all scared of making a decision. And so there's also part of, in a disaster response, knowing that in the first 24 to 48 hours, you're going to do something wrong. Not because you're a bad humanitarian or a bad project manager, because you didn't have any information, and the information might have been false, right? Because, maybe one example, to go to the volcano, I remember in the first 3 hours they had said, the lava's hit the airport, and the airport is kind of into the city. It hadn't hit the airport, but there were videos and photos shared on social media, and it was this huge thing like, oh, we're done. We can't even get supplies in. It's cooked. Well, that wasn't the case, but people had to make decisions on the information that they'd been given. So, do you evacuate? Do you not evacuate? Right? So that first 12 hours was pretty chaotic, and you had to kind of parse through what's real and what's not, and taking information and confirming it. But again, you can't do too much of that, because then you won't do anything at all. So part of it is just knowing that, listen, it's going to be a bit sloppy in the first 24 to 48 hours. After that, we're doing a quick review. We're kind of renewing our thinking on this. We're checking in, and we continue to go, go, go. And then you look at it and you go, it was a week. You know what? That was great. That we missed. But now we can maybe address that, right? As long as we're acting and going and going. And so, yeah, I think sometimes it's just a realization that it takes some courage to say, really, this is a chaotic situation. Nobody knows what's going on. People are thinking the worst. So let's remain calm. Let's check in on our people, and let's get this thing done. I'm sure I could go on and on and on, but I won't.
I love what you're saying, though, just about decision making, and how it sounds like, especially, I think in every organization, decision making ability is really crucial. But for you folks, like, constantly thinking about decision making and refining that process, and just building the capacity within your team and your organization as far as decision making goes, is probably crucial. So I just wanted to ask you, there's these kind of decisions where I've heard more recently, it was actually Jeff Bezos who I heard him talk about this. It was really interesting. He talked about these two-way door decisions and one-way door decisions. Two-way door decisions are these decisions where you can walk through that door, and it's okay, whatever the decision is, you can always come back through that door. And it's like the consequences of it are, they might be not as high, there might be some impacts there, but you can always come back through that door. One-way door decisions are these door decisions where you go through and it's significant. There's going to be a lasting impact. It could potentially completely change the course of that organization. There are major consequences involved. The kind of decisions that you're thinking about when you hear one-way or two-way door decisions, I imagine most of those can be highly consequential, and these kind of one-way door decisions. Would that be fair to say?
I think, in a way, I think that once you're into disaster response, there's an understanding, though, across the board, from donors, from yeah, I would say from other partners. Generally speaking, the humanitarian community knows that it can get difficult because you don't have the number.
Mhm.
You just don't have the information. There's a lot of times, and they'll go, so how many people were displaced by the latest violence? And they'll go, I think it was 20,000. And then the number goes, no, it was 70. They go, 70? We didn't have the information despite our best efforts. I think the point, like I say, is this: you need to act. I've seen careers end because they're not acting, like they're majoring on minor things. And when you're getting into kind of greater response work, which is again speaking to displaced people, right, that are literally fleeing from their homes due to conflict, due to, again, in Mozambique, if I can say, I was part of the cyclone response. If you're not acting, I think that's a one-way that's a one-way door, because people will look at this and say, you're here to get this done now. You're here to, push this off now, especially at the beginning. Once you get away from that first phase, when people know, now we know how many people there are, we know the level of needs, we know what kind of needs, you're able to go a little slower, right? Because we all kind of have an understanding, and this is where the coordination kinks have been worked out, right? And we've greater determined what funding is required, and all these different points. It's that first phase where I've seen people that just can't do it, and you'll literally go, I'm moving you here, and you need to stay there right now. We're doing this job. I would suppose that if you're looking at that outside of disaster work, it's more around strategic decisions. But even then, I guess the benefit of working for World Vision for so long is you get to know who they are, and you understand risk profile, and you understand best use of resources, right? All of those things. So if people are just going like, hey, we're going to go to this new area, it's extremely dangerous, we don't really have funds available, it could incur a debt, people would go, what are you doing? Whereas we would say, and a lot of NGOs would say something similar, which is, we can see that there's a huge need. We're talking with donors about supporting that. We're doing all the
Yep.
necessary assessments. So being kind of a responsible leader, ensuring staff and beneficiary safety, all of those things, then even if you make that decision and it goes a bit sideways, people would go, we understood why, we understood the logic behind it. So even that's something that, and we've taken some hits. I've been part of those. It's usually when the time comes, did it fit with the cultural values of your organization? Did it fit with what the needs were? Did it make sense? Could you explain this logic and brought people on board? That's okay. It's people that kind of shoot from the hip and they make a rash decision that doesn't align. Those are the people that they're going, what were you thinking? And they would go, we're going for it. And it's like, no, and I would say part of humanitarian work is, I think that there's sometimes a view that humanitarians are like fast and loose. It's not. This is a big business. This is like a multi-billion-dollar business. So it's not that people are just running in to some area and kind of like throwing supplies around haphazardly. This is something that has been, like, again, multiple international NGOs with decades of experience are utilizing this understanding and knowledge to say, what's the best version of this response? What's the best version of us, meeting the key needs right now and looking forward to 12 months and beyond for a more durable solution. So yeah, it's usually that. I think that it's usually, I shouldn't say this because it's unfair to smaller NGOs. There's some great smaller NGOs, but I've seen in some cases where the standards might not be up to par,
Sure.
right? Or the decision making isn't great. And those are usually ones that take a bigger hit because they hadn't thought through some of the strategic points.
Yeah. Dave, as the Eastern Zone director right now, what are you focused on in terms of humanitarian crises? What's your work focused on right now?
Yeah, I showed up in September 2020 and I'd moved from Mozambique as part of the cyclone response that had been wrapping up. And the conflict where it is today was not what it was in September 2020. The context was more stable. It was kind of easier to move around. And so the work was also, I would say, you could have a longer term view when you would talk about food security, for instance. You wouldn't be looking at a 6-month window. You're looking at a 5-6 year window. You're saying we can make durable, advancements here with local government, with community leaders, with local institutions. But since I've been here, it was from 2020 to 2021 to 2022. It almost feels like there's been a progression in the wrong way, where the number of displaced people have grown, people that have fled from their communities and houses. Violence has gone up. Criminality, unfortunately, has also gone up. The number of armed actors has multiplied. We still try and look long term because World Vision has been in the DRC since 1984, and we've been in the East for, I think, about 30 years. But we're not able to think as much about 2030. We're thinking about next week because, to a greater extent, our work has been on meeting first level needs. So that's been a lot of partnership with the World Food Program on the next distribution cycle, which is, again, there have been a new number of displaced people, and we need to meet those needs. As an example, last week I was in a place called Chofi, where I think we were trying to meet the needs of 10,000 households, which is about 50,000 people, newly displaced. So that is, again, more frontline need, right? And what you do there is you're kind of confirming the numbers, you're ensuring that it's a safe site, you're ensuring their safety and staff safety, and you're working again with local authorities, and then you do the distribution. Just yesterday, I was in Minova, and again, we're looking to provide, I believe it's close to 100,000 people, newly displaced people, with frontline support, which is, again, the basics. And these are really the basics. We're talking salt, fortified oil, fortified flour, and split peas. That's it. Because resources are stretched. And that's something that we've seen again in Eastern DRC is I think that sometimes there's an apathy associated with different responses in the world, right? I think, again, that, like, if you talk about Ukraine, or if you talk about Gaza, or if you talk about maybe like a new disaster, the eyes of the world turn to that. But in Eastern DRC, there's kind of a view that this has been going on for 30 years. It's not necessarily the case, but I know that there's been flare-ups in the East DRC. So when people hear about newly displaced people, they'll kind of go, didn't that happen in 2015? Didn't that happen
It's
in
not the same
2020?
reaction,
It's kind of
right?
like, yeah, it's not the same reaction. So as a result, we're trying to meet more need with more displaced people with not the resources that are required. So a lot of my job in East DRC is really to try and find these available funds, because we've got a great food assistance team. We've got great work that we do in protection. It's difficult though, because I think one of the real challenges is you see that there's a growing need, and you kind of feel like our hands are tied because we can't meet all that need. So as a result, you know that vulnerability is going up. You're concerned, generally speaking, about greater sexual exploitation and abuse. You're worried that children aren't going to school. You're worried about the possibility in these displaced camps of, again, like a cholera outbreak or something. So it's difficult. I think, generally speaking, it's managing a high risk and fragile situation. So that's very difficult, the work itself. And I go back to this point of staff care. It's not just World Vision, but certainly with World Vision, people are feeling the effects of burnout. And I'm not sure if you know too much about burnout. I'm sure you know some. It doesn't just go away in a weekend. It takes time. And there's of a psychological stress to it. There's a physiological stress to it that people look at this and go, we've been doing distributions for literally a couple of years now, and insecure areas, difficult areas, really desperate people who are really concerned about where their next meal is coming from. That weighs, again, on I would say, again, the humanitarian community. It weighs on, you can even say, faith-based communities who are supporting, local governments, national governments, the UN agencies that are there, right? World Health Organization, WFP, and so on and so forth. So yeah, there's an incredible stress into working in East DRC right now, trying to find an acceptable point, an acceptable kind of stress level and work level is something that you're kind of constantly checking in, because again, for a couple of weeks, it could be extremely high stress, and then it diminishes and you try and find a few moments and then it goes back up again. So yeah, challenging, I'll say. A lovely place. I love East DRC. Speaking on the point of burnout, it's very secondary, of course. If you were to see these camps that we work in, and I'll quote a few of them for you: Kanyaruchina, Bulengo, Rusayo, in Minova, in Chofi, Bushagara, holding literally hundreds of thousands of people. It's really like a hell on earth because people are in cramped, unsanitary conditions despite best efforts. That there's not enough resources to go around. So that really is, it's horrific, I have to say. Very difficult to go and to provide support when you can see that really it's never really enough. But a component of this is burning out because, again, when you're seeing this difficulty and there's really a weight and a pressure to ensure that it's done very well, because nobody wants poorly managed support, right? Of course, the food assistance provided needs to meet needs. It needs to be done the right way. You need to be respectful. You need to be, starting early. You need to finish later than you'd like. You need to come up against insecurity. And maybe one example is there have been several distributions where a bombing is happening nearby. So you could literally hear in the distance, gunfire or something shooting off.
Yeah.
And what the stress that puts on the team is extremely difficult because you're thinking about, is this going the wrong way? Do I need to worry about my family? And then you get it, and we'll come along and say, no, it's fine, right? Or security would come along and say it's okay. So you continue to work. But just being in those conditions, the economy is suffering, of course, because of this conflict. Road networks have been turned off, so there's less movement of goods. So people are again saying, what used to be cheaper for fruits and vegetables becoming more expensive. There might be greater household pressure around, again, I have to support, 2 additional children just because that the economy has gone the wrong way. So there's like all these kind of secondary pressures of living and working in Eastern DRC. So, I mean, you can see just the kind of weight sometimes on people's shoulders, right? People are a bit slumped over. There's a tiredness. And that to me speaks to a burnout, which is really dangerous. So a large part of doing good humanitarian work in this context is taking care of others and taking care of yourself. I'm not great at doing that. I'm not great at taking care of myself because there's part of this view that you don't want to be seen as kind of what you say, the weak link in the chain.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But really, just with a multitude of need and the quantity and the urgency around it, it sometimes feel like you're running a sprint, but like at the length of a marathon, which you can't do. Usain Bolt
Yeah.
runs 100 meters. He doesn't run the 400. He runs the 100.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so for me, it's been I unfortunately got quite sick after the volcano because again there was kind of a fatigue and there was an opportunistic illness that hit me and I was laid out. Unfortunately, I had to go back to Canada. It was bad enough. And then I came back, and that was kind of a realization of you have to kind of pace yourself because you might be pulling in huge hours for 2 weeks. You have to be able to kind of say, this person can maybe step in for 2 days. I need to just work a little less because if not, I could really fall over. And I've seen with some humanitarians this view that like, yeah, if I'm not falling over, I'm not getting the job done. But that's not making most use of your capacity and
No.
your ability, either managing other people or managing something specific. And you, again, I go back to this point of what are you modeling to the people that work for you? Are you, if you're pulling in 18 hours, people will kind of feel like, I think I have to work 18 hours. You know what I mean? Because look what the boss is doing. You need to be able to sometimes say, I'm taking the weekend off.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you need me, you can catch me on the phone after 5. Other than that, I'm not checking my mails. And then also, again, like I said, you're checking in with your people and you're ensuring that it's appropriate for them. To be honest, what I found that really works for me each place it's been different. When I was in Jordan, I got into succulents. I just took off with succulents. I love succulents. What to say? And just kind of like having them around, and it became something it became like a secondary passion. So it wasn't just work. East DRC, I've really gotten into cooking. That started in Mozambique. It was like part of COVID. We were kind of shut down, right? So again, like many people, I bought the flour, I bought the yeast,
Yeah. Yeah.
started
Yeah.
cooking breads, and that's sustained. So it's been important for my own kind of health and well-being, which is to find other passions. Because if you don't have those and all you've got is the work, and I've seen this with many humanitarians, they can't turn off. And you're going to just become, after a certain amount of time, you're just going to become irritable, low performing. And then people are going to go like, this person's not doing the job. And imagine that person thinking like, I have worked more hours and I've done more of this and I'm getting a performance question. So it goes beyond humanitarian work, of course. I think you could say this if you're in the banking sector, if you're in healthcare, or whatever. If you're not taking care of yourself and you don't recognize that life is a marathon, it's going to hit you hard, and it's going to affect yourself. It's going to affect your family. It's going to affect your relationships. Ultimately, nobody wants that. So yeah, maybe just a reminder again to myself and whoever's listening, take care of yourselves. Take time for that. You deserve it.
I was going to ask you about your self-care, and maybe more broadly though, as humanitarians, is there an opportunity, kind of almost like a military approach in terms of doing tours, like tours of duty almost? Can that be possible in humanitarian work?
Not really. I think so. What you have in certain organizations is what are called kind of response teams, and they might
Mm-hmm.
be 2 people from the States, or 3 people from Kenya, or 1 person from Somalia, and the people that maybe have been identified as, through past responses, been really high performers. They made it onto maybe certain like talent lists. In World Vision, there's basically like a roster of people that if things, let's just say next week there is, I'm not sure, a cyclone in Mozambique again. They would probably be called to set up the response because they, again, have a lot of experience in first phase, large emergencies.
Yeah.
Something smaller, like I had said, the landslide or the volcano, was really our management because it wasn't considered, a global disaster, and there's certain classifications of disasters. That they said, is this okay? We can see the capacity that you have. So I would say, again, when the big response or the big disaster happens, it could be, again, like Ukraine or the Mozambique situation, or it could be a coming drought in Somalia. Hopefully not. You might have a global team come in, and they would do 2-3 months, as they would then transition to a longer term team or the
Okay.
national office that's already there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they would also, as part of that, they would probably get some time off after, because the expectation for this first phase team again is like, hey, you're getting it done and you're pulling in those big hours, so they will have some time off. Um, it's a component of probably a larger organizational prioritization around being responsive.
Yeah, yeah. I think folks can probably hear your kids or your kid crying in the background. How are you? Like, how have you been able to manage just being a dad in this whole sort of situation? Like, I can't even imagine what that's like.
I don't know. I don't know how I've done
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
It can be exhausting sometimes because
yeah,
kids on their own are. It's been probably the greatest thing that happened to me having two
yeah,
boys, Jordan and
yeah.
Noah. Jordan born in Mozambique, I should say, and Noah born in Zambia. It's part of, I
Wow.
guess, one of those components of working internationally is, these things happen. Um, but yeah, listen, this year, managing multiple emergencies, having a new baby, sometimes I was kind of just rubbing my eyes and going, I don't know what I'm doing. I should say my wife has been amazing. So sometimes I have to go somewhere and my wife, will just step in and step up. We do it together, obviously, right? So it's been great to go through this experience. But I would say, listen, obviously the added stress, anxiety of what I just described in terms of the context made it very difficult. I'm sure that if someone's listening and they're again in like law enforcement or a teacher or lawyer or whatever,
Mm,
and they're like, yeah, I know, we're doing the same thing on this side. And it's true. I think it's again about the principle of kind of being able to manage your time and, in my case, certainly rely and support your significant other, so that you can together kind of go through the tough moments, right? When a child is sick or when they're not
yeah,
sleeping or when they're just being crazy. Knowing that, of course, after I would say the first 6 months is when they can start to get into a regular sleep schedule, which means you
yeah,
can get into one.
yeah,
Um, and then, yeah, just knowing that again, like that first phase of a baby's life is always a bit, fun and chaotic and wild, and you get through it, right? Because you know that the next step is going to be their first steps, and those are all those great joys that come with that. So, yeah, it's really just, to be honest, I don't know how, because it was really wild in East DRC, and having a baby, as everybody probably knows, is a fun but challenging time. Um, but now he's over a year old, and my other boy, he's going to kindergarten here in
hmm
Rwanda. So it's been lovely. It's been a lot of fun, and I think part of that is again just choosing to have the perspective of gratefulness over the fact that they're healthy, that we're all healthy, um, yeah, and that we're going to get through all these challenges together.
Do you ever question sometimes like why would I have my family there, or are you there? Do you think you're there for good, or what does that look like?
Yeah, so people would look and go, wait, there's a big conflict in East, and Dave is there with his family. Like, what is he doing? And again, it's part of that. It's part of that thing, I guess. Like, okay, there's a neighborhood in Toronto, right? Jane and Finch, which has got
Yeah,
a really negative reputation. But
yeah,
I'm going to assume this, and I think I'll be right, that if you live in Jane and Finch, listen, I shouldn't go to this certain area or go down this street at this certain
hmm
time or this back alley or whatever. Generally speaking, I know how to survive and thrive in this area, right? There's
hmm
challenges, of course. Now, I should say, where I'm in, it's a beautiful place. Like, it's rolling green mountains. It's beautiful. We're on the lake. Yes, there are challenges. But again, once you're in a place and you know the context and you know some red lines and you know the do's and the do not do's and you respect
yeah,
those, we've been able to have like really a lovely time. And it's been, again, since I got married, we've gone from Cyprus to Jordan to Mozambique to DRC, and now we're in on the border with Rwanda. And I wouldn't trade it for the world. It's been, again, like adventure.
yeah,
It's been the desert. It's been the ocean. And now it's been in a place where again we found ourselves and we found our comfort and we found our space. And yeah, we enjoy it very much. And I think I had said this. My little boy, he just did karate this morning. My wife did karate earlier. We're able to go for nice walks. So yeah, we've been able to find, despite the difficulties of the context, a really great situation.
That's wonderful. That's so awesome to hear. And I just love again the way you started off this way in the conversation, but also just kind of wrapping up here on this conversation. Just the way you spoke about just giving people that context. I like the Jane and Finch example. It's I kind of grew up in North York and Toronto, and Jane and Finch wasn't that far. And you're right, like you know what the red lines are. You know the areas that you got to stay away from. That's with any city. That's with any place.
Yeah.
And so giving that people that perspective, I think is really helpful. I just want to just really quickly before we kind of wrap up, and I know it's not a quick conversation, but just the conflict that's happening in Eastern DRC. I don't know if people really understand here, probably in North America and Canada, really what's happening there. Maybe just walk through a bit of the history and what's really driving the conflict over there.
It's that's a long answer because
Yeah,
it's not something that you explain quickly. Because it could even go back. I mean, I don't want to go so far back to say it was the time of King Leopold, the Belgian king, from so long ago in the 1800s in the story of colonialism. But the echoes of that led to, again, if you look at Africa on the map, and you can see that it was not a continent that was divided up by Africans, but by Europeans. And they obviously didn't take into account the complexities of different areas, whether that's right. You can talk about, you can say long-term issues that have happened in Cameroon, or you can talk about along the Sahel, or you can even say in parts of Southern Africa, and Congo is no different. And the Great Lakes, which I should say, which includes Uganda and Rwanda and Burundi, is no different. And so just looking at Rwanda's history, and again, this kind of post-colonial time that, again, you can lead up to 1994, which was the Rwandan genocide, a horrific time that happened over 3 months, which then led to this kind of African World War eventually, which encompassed, I believe it was 9 countries. It led to millions of people dying, either through violence or fleeing from violence, right? A lot of displacement. And that was never really resolved. And there have been a lot of attempts. There have been a lot of, I guess you can say, good faith and not so good faith attempts to figure out durable, peaceful solutions. We're talking whether that's kind of within Eastern DRC or nationally or regionally or even globally. But despite that, there's still kind of different players at loggerheads with each other about what this needs to be in terms of the many identities of tribe and nationality, and the history associated with all of those things. And so, listen, as humanitarians, we're kind of mindful of, certainly we have to be mindful of the
yeah,
context and what this means ultimately on the ground. But, in accordance with our principles, we kind of look and say, listen, we're here to provide, ideally, a better future together in partnership. And I think that's very important to say that NGOs aren't the leads. It's the government who's the lead. NGOs complement the efforts. And so
hmm
we try to partner with, again, local and national governments to strengthen peace building in some areas. I think you could probably speak to several examples in the world where it's much more difficult, right, to find peaceful solutions. I mean, again, you can just look in the pages of the news today and be awestruck by the violence that you're seeing in other parts of the world. And in East DRC, it's a similar situation where you look at a protracted conflict and really we hope and pray that there's going to be a greater solution. And that's why I said in 2020 we had a longer view. Right now it's a shorter view, unfortunately.
mm
Like, we look and just say, let's meet frontline needs and provide key support to affected families, children, communities, with the hope that all the efforts, because there are ongoing efforts diplomatically, globally, to for people to find each other, for countries to find each other, for things to calm down. Because ultimately what everybody, I think, ultimately wants is functioning economy, freedom of movement, greater security, so that children are going to school. Because you look at this, and if I can just speak again to, I remember in the Syria response, there was something called No Lost Generation, and it was kind of like this global education initiative where the concern was around children have been out of school for 4 or 5 years, and now they're
hmm
16 and 17. What are these young women and men going to do? Uh, and it's a potential tragedy, because you're saying you're dooming people for life, right? If you're not getting people primary, secondary education.
creating generational
Um,
trauma, right?
yeah, it's creating generational trauma, and you're really handcuffing people to really limited opportunities. Like if you haven't been to high school, it's really difficult to get into certain businesses, right? And to kind of advanced sectors and industries. So yeah, unfortunately, I'm not trying to go around in circles. Eastern DRC again is a protracted and fragile crisis in context that unfortunately has been going on for quite some time. It's in a very bad position right now. But we as a humanitarian industry don't really have the luxury to go into like all of those details. Our focus really is let's meet the needs of people that most need it.
Yeah.
So that as these kind of greater issues are hopefully being worked on and ironed out, and there's a roadmap to peace, those people will be able to meet that brighter future in a better position.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. And yeah, I appreciate just giving that broader understanding and sort of the role of humanitarians in these sort of situations. Dave, I really appreciate you. I really appreciate your this conversation today. Sometimes I don't know. I think for myself too. Like it's like I'd love to find a way to help on the front lines. I'd love to find a way to be there and support more directly. But you get scared. You get scared about what that could look like. The challenges it could create, especially now I have a young family. Just even thought of putting my young family out there. You're able to just give people that broader perspective to in this conversation. But I also want to say you're the one who's doing it. You're out there on the front line, and I'm just so proud of you and the way you're kind of leading your teams and supporting people of need. So just appreciate you making time for me today and walking through what it's like to really lead and manage through a humanitarian crisis, your story of how you got there, and yeah, just helping people understand that there are these kind of longer term needs that we often forget about, especially when you have these kind of emerging situations happening, Ukraine and Gaza, but there's these broader needs out there that people tend to forget about. So thank you so much for making time for me today and having this conversation. I really appreciate you.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And I would say this, again, I've been in this industry now for over a decade, and it's been illuminating and challenging, of course. But I've really gotten an appreciation for kind of an organization itself, how it functions and its culture. We're both Canadians. And I would say World Vision Canada, there's an office in Canada, there's an office in the US and Hong Kong and UK, and there's many of these supporting offices. They play a vital role as well. Like there's sometimes maybe a misunderstanding that, like you'll say Dave or whoever it is over there and they're doing the work or leading the charge or whatever. It's like, well, not without the support that we're getting from our national office in Kinshasa. We also have a regional office in Johannesburg. And then also, again, we're talking with Canadian counterparts who are kind of, again, doing marketing and getting outreach, and they're raising awareness. And so that's been great. I've been proud to say that it's really like a greater effort. And I can speak to World Vision, of course, because I'm with World Vision. So I can say it's a great World Vision effort. But I would also say that there are other organizations. There is Oxfam. There is Save the Children. There is Doctors Without Borders. There is Norwegian Refugee Council. And, the list goes on of these great groups. Listen, I will always champion World Vision because I've been with them so long and I've really appreciated them. But I would just say if someone's listening and they're interested to get involved, it doesn't mean you're going to South Sudan. It might, but it could mean that you're doing some volunteer work, right? That's helpful. Or listen, there's always the fundraising component, right? People ask, can you support
Yep.
$20, $50? Sure. But I think it's just kind of connecting into that world of knowing what's going on, because it sounds funny to say with so many disasters, it seems like a very negative, difficult space. And there is that component, but there is also it's incredibly edifying as well to see people step up and step in and give of themselves. Like I sometimes ask myself, like, could I see myself doing anything else? And I kind of want to say yes, because again, the allure of Canada sounds nice, but I really love this work. I love our industry. I love what we do on the ground. I love what we do as organizations, as an industry. So yeah, I invite people to come and get involved, and just to kind of figure out, what's going on and how they can support. It doesn't mean that, again, it doesn't mean you're going to these places. It might just mean that
Yeah.
you're involved in understanding what's going on and taking some time and effort and energy to be a part of that. And I think, again, it's a rewarding experience. I'm quite happy to do what I do, and I suppose that's the best thing I can say. I found a calling and a purpose.
That's fantastic. Compared to like where we started the conversation of, leaving Waterloo to now, like, yeah, it just sounds like everything's making sense for you.
And I'll say one thing, because so I said at the beginning I'd stopped playing basketball for a while, but since then I've been able to have some wild basketball experiences. Like I spoke about the one in South Sudan. In the DRC, the same thing happened. I was asked to play for a local team, and we won the city cup for Likasi, which is a big city. So we won that cup. And then when I was in Jordan, I found myself on a team, and I was playing like semi-pro ball in Jordan, and I was just going like, I can't believe this. I keep falling into these. And in Cyprus, because I lived in Cyprus for a stretch,
Yeah.
I was also on a team, and again, like I was able to, because when you're traveling internationally, sometimes it's like a party of one, and so to connect in, it was like a familiar terrain, and I was able to kind of find a subculture that I was really passionate about and involved in. So it's been great too. And again, like, imagine going out for drinks in Cyprus with a basketball team, and you get to understand more about Cyprus, and the same thing with Jordan, and you're meeting people from different walks of life. So that's been, again, like, I didn't get into the job for that. I got into the job for other reasons, but to be able to have those moments, whether it's been basketball or other things, just to explore this world itself, this wide, beautiful world of ours, has been, it's been something that, like, no regrets at all, man. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Let's leave it at that, Dave. It's been a really fantastic conversation. Appreciate you again, and you're always welcome back to chat. And I always wish you the very, very best in what's going on over there with you and your young family. And hopefully we'll connect another time.
Certainly, it's been a pleasure. Certainly.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Like, subscribe, and appreciate you. And we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.